All right. And I'm so pleased to be reintroducing you to Paul Selps. And the topic today is intriguing. Haters gotta hate. And we're looking forward to hearing what you're going to say, Paul. So you're on.
Thank you, Diane. And hello, fellow residents. Those who are especially brave and public-spirited who are watching this lecture today. It's not a feel-good lecture. Obviously, the subject doesn't allow that. But it's an important insight into what's happening around us in our world here in Philadelphia and elsewhere in this country and other countries as well. We're in a moment in history in which there seems to be a breakdown in civility and civilization. So I'm going to swing into this woebegone topic and hopefully shed some light. Now I'm trying to share my notes and I don't know why I'm not. Okay. Okay, here we are. When I wrote this, these handouts, by the way.
Oh, if you think we're seeing it, we're not.
Oh, you don't. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
It's not visible. Okay. Share screen. There we go. Yeah. Can everyone see that today? Okay. When I was writing this, the newspaper that morning had a photograph. I'm going to stop sharing so I can show you the photograph. This photograph of a gentleman who was marching against violence, against in the same newspaper, there was a companion story about a police officer shot in New Jersey, and there's a point to showing you this because every day there are multiple stories, not just one, but stories like this. The rise of anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish incidents. Here, there was a more recent one showing just a week ago, anti-Semitic flyers found on SEPTA trains. Okay, and people involved in shootings, in assaults, and then, as I say in this handout, which is available, by the way, the first thing that my eyes see in the morning newspaper is a large photograph showing that marcher accompanied by others wearing a shirt appealing for peace. Stop killing us. He's beginning his 7th march to Washington to lobby Congress to deal with guns and violence. On the first page of the second section, is that story, which is 5 columns wide. That's a lot of space devoted to in a newspaper, plus another story, police officer shot in Gloucester County. This has gotten to be a typical story that opens the news every day. This also typically ends the TV news every day in the 11 p.m. broadcast, day after day. This has gotten to be the norm of our domestic life. At the start of each day and the close of each day, violence is impressed into our consciousness when we wake up and when we go to sleep. How aware are many Americans that this is the new normal? And one of the other troubling questions this condition evokes is there a connection in the rise of hate crimes and the rise of hate groups? Much of the information in this presentation comes from the FBI as America's governmental firewall against threats to the safety and security of Americans. But the FBI's work is supplemented by critically important nonprofit organizations as well, two that are vital and central and that you'll hear about not only from me, but in the news over and over. The Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League. More about these and similar groups will follow. The book from which I worked for this presentation is Hate Groups, and the citation is here listed. And I will show you the book. Okay. All right, hate groups in general. Organizations with strong negative feelings against other groups of individuals are known as hate groups. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a hate group is an organization whose primary purpose is to promote animosity, hostility, and malice against persons of or with a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity, which differs from that of the members or the organization. The Ku Klux Klan and American Nazi Party are visible examples of hate groups. Most hate groups direct their campaign against specific groups such as Jews, Catholics, African Americans, Muslims, gay men and lesbians, or transgendered individuals. However, the FBI collects far more detailed statistical information on hate group victims. Symbolism. It's not always easy to uncover a hate group as they prefer to operate in the shadows in secrecy. A characteristic feature is the symbolism they use. They may wear special kinds of clothing, have unique kinds of tattoos, employ recognizable hand gestures, or use distinctive symbols in their banners. For example, some groups may use the number 14 in their materials. These stand for, and this is why it's difficult to discern, because this next sentence doesn't look at all like it belongs to a hate group. But the number 14 stands for the 14 words in a group's statement of philosophy. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. All right, talking about white supremacy and the fear that engenders this kind of reaction of hate, the fear that white people will be replaced and displaced in American society. Links to hate crimes, and this may come to you as a surprise. One might reasonably assume that hate groups are closely associated with hate crimes. That is, it seems logical that individuals who carry out some kind of action against others because of their race, religion, and so on have a connection with one or more hate groups. A person who sets fire to a church serving mainly African Americans might be expected to belong to the KKK or some other group with professed disapproval of Black people and institutions. One reads about that presumption from time to time. Similarly, when an 18-year-old boy vandalizes a Jewish cemetery, law officials and media reporters will ask, was he a member of some hate group that encouraged such action? But a body of research suggests that the connections between hate groups and hate crimes is more tenuous than might be expected. This began in 2011 when researchers at Duquesne and George Mason Universities examined annual data on hate crime compiled between 2002 and 2008 by the Southern Poverty Law Center. They expected that the potential connection between hate groups and hate crimes is obvious. That's what they said. But they concluded from their study, surprisingly, we find little evidence that hate groups are associated with hate crimes in the United States. They were mystified as to what factors then were predictive of hate crimes. A more focused study using only white supremacist groups found little empirical evidence for an association between hate groups and hate crimes. The most extensive study in 2019, thus far, found no clear evidence of causation. Although experts in the field haven't yet discovered any significant connection, they're still trying to understand the factors causing hate crimes. So what radicalizes individuals to extremist views and extremist actions? What motivates people to hurl insults at or to assault a stranger on the street, such as has been reported recently, Asian Americans, or to send a death threat by telephone or email? It's been hard for me to understand what precipitates extremism, but it's also been hard for me to understand why people litter, especially when a trash can is nearby, or refuse to wear a mask when there's copious evidence that a virus is dangerous, deadly, and contagious. What erodes basic civility in our society? Well, here's what Wikipedia says. Radicalization is the process by which an individual or a group comes to adopt increasingly radical views in opposition to a political, social, or religious status quo. Radical movements can originate from a broad social consensus against progressive changes in society or from a broad desire for change in society. Radicalization can result in both violent and non-violent action. Academic literature focuses on radicalization into violent extremism, leading to acts of terrorism. Radicalization that occurs across multiple reinforcing pathways greatly increases a group's resilience and lethality. Good word, lethality. Furthermore, by compromising a group's ability to blend in with non-radical society and to participate in modern national or international economy, radicalization serves as a kind of sociological trap that gives individuals no other place to go to satisfy their material and spiritual needs. On the right wing, radical right-wing terrorism is motivated by a variety of different right-wing far-right ideologies, most prominently neo-fascism, neo-Nazism, white nationalism, and to a lesser extent, patriot, sovereign, citizen beliefs, and anti-abortion sentiment. Modern radical right-wing terrorism appeared in the United States in the 1970s. Groups associated with right-wing radicals include white power skinhead gangs, right-wing, far-right hooligans and sympathizers. From 2008 and 2016, there were more right-wing terror attacks, both attempted and accomplished in the United States, than Islamist and left-wing attacks combined. Right-wing populism by those who support ethnocentrism, usually white nationalism, and oppose immigration creates a climate of us versus them, leading to radicalization. The growth of white nationalism in a political climate of polarization has provided an opportunity for both on and offline radicalization and recruitment as an alternative to increasingly distrusted traditional mainstream choices. In 2009, the United States Department of Homeland Security identified economic and political conditions as leading to a rise in right-wing radicalization and recruitment. The Anti-Defamation League reports that white supremacist propaganda and recruitment efforts on and around college campuses have been increasing sharply, with 1,187 incidents in 2018 compared to 421 incidents in 2017, a year earlier, far exceeding any previous year. Far-right terrorists rely on a variety of strategies, such as leafleting, violent rituals, and house parties to recruit, targeting angry and marginalized youth looking for solutions to their problems. But their most effective recruitment tool is extremist music, which avoids monitoring by moderating parties such as parents and school authorities. Risk factors for recruitment include exposure to racism during childhood, dysfunctional families, such as divorced parents, or physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, neglect, and most important, probably, disillusionment. In 2018, researchers from the Data and Society think tank identified the YouTube recommendation system as promoting a range of political positions, from mainstream libertarianism and conservatism to overt white nationalism. Many other online discussion groups and forums are used for online right-wing radicalization. Facebook was found to be offering advertisements targeted to 168,000 users in a white genocide conspiracy theory category, which they removed shortly after being contacted by journalists in the wake of the 2018 Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. After the March 15th, 2019 Christchurch mosque shootings in New Zealand, Facebook announced that they have banned white nationalist and white separatist content along with white supremacy. Now, unless you feel that the left is superior to the right wing, left-wing terrorism is also observed. Left-wing terrorism is terrorism committed with the aim of overthrowing current capitalist systems and replacing them with Marxist, Leninist, or socialist societies. While left-wing terrorism is ideologically motivated, nationalist separatist terrorism is ethnically motivated. The revolutionary goal of left-wing terrorism is non-negotiable, whereas nationalist terrorists are willing to make concessions. Rigidity of the demands of left-wing terrorists may explain their lack of support relative to nationalist groups. Some separatist movements incorporated communist and socialist ideology into their policies. Well, here are some leading theories why radicalization occurs. Personal grievance. This pathway emphasizes revenge for real or perceived harm inflicted upon oneself by an outside party. This initial offense triggers other psychodynamic mechanisms, such as thinking in more stark in-group and out-group terms, lower inhibitions to violence, and lessened incentives to avoid violence. Group grievance. Group grievance radicalization dynamics are similar to those that are primed by personal grievance. The difference is that the subject perceives harm inflicted on a group that she belongs to or has sympathy for. This pathway accounts for the larger portion of political and ethnic racial or radical violence, in which action is taken on behalf of the group at large, rather than as an act of personal revenge. Some commentators believe that the anger and suspicion directed toward innocent Muslims living in Western countries after the September 11 attacks and the indignities inflicted upon them by security forces and the general public contributes to radicalization of new recruits, such as us versus them hostility cited by commentators, and that includes political positions such as the Trump travel ban, which Donald Trump initially campaigned for as a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States, or, ironically, Senator Ted Cruz's call to patrol and secure Muslim neighborhoods before they become radicalized. That one's a laugh, but there's nothing funny about it. Slippery slope. The slippery slope represents gradual radicalization through activities that incrementally narrow the individual's social circle, narrow their mindset, and in some cases, desensitize them to violence. Love, yes, even here. Romantic and familial entanglement is often an overlooked factor in radicalization. Several violent extremist organizations, especially at their beginning, their origin, owe their structure to a tight-knit group of friends who share religious, economic, social, and sexual bonds. While this example is evident in more extreme cases, such as those of Charles Manson's family and other radical cults, it also applies to radicalization in secular and orthodox religious environments. Risk and status. Within a radical group, high-risk behavior, if successful, offers a pathway to status insofar as it becomes reconstrued as bravery and commitment to the cause. As such, violence or other radical activity provides a pathway to success, social acceptance, and physical rewards, that might otherwise be out of reach. Disproportionate involvement in risk-taking and status-seeking is particularly true of those young men who come from disadvantaged family backgrounds, have lower IQ levels, and are of lower socioeconomic status, and who therefore have less opportunity to succeed in society along a traditional career path. These young men are more likely to be involved in gang activity, violent crime, and other high-risk behavior. Unfreezing, loss of social connection can open an individual to new ideas and a new identity that may include political radicalization. Isolated from friends, family, or other basic needs, individuals may begin to associate with unlike parties, to include political, religious, or cultural radicals. This is especially noted in prison radicalization, where individuals bind together over racial, religious, and gang identity to a greater degree than in the outside world, and often bring their newfound radical identity beyond prison to connect with radical organizations in the populace at large. Polarization. Discussion, interaction, and experience within a radical group can result in an aggregate increase in commitment to the cause, and in some cases can contribute to the formation of divergent conceptions of the group's purpose and preferred tactics. Within a radical group, internal dynamics can contribute to the formation of different factions as a result of internal disillusionment or, conversely, ambitions with the group's activities as a whole, especially when it comes to a choice between violent terrorism and nonviolent activism. The Weather Undergrounds of the 60s, the Weather Underground split with Students for a Democratic Society, is one of many examples. The dynamics of group polarization imply that members of this larger group must either commit to one faction and demonstrate their loyalty through further radicalization, or leave the group entirely. And the internet is a valuable tool in this radicalization. Utilizing data compiled by the Internet World Stats, Robin Thompson contends that the rate of Middle East and North African internet usage is above average in comparison to other countries, yet in countries where internet availability is more widespread, individuals are more likely to be recruited and radicalized via the internet. Hence, the internet, specifically social media sites such as extremists' chat rooms and blogs, lures its users with a promise of friendship, acceptance, or a sense of purpose. Groups can become radicalized vis-a-vis other groups as they compete for legitimacy and prestige with the general populace. This pathway emphasizes increased radicalization in an effort to outdo other groups, whether that increase is in violence, time spent in religious ritual, economic and physical hardship endured, or all four. Religious movements and the terrorist elements that form in their name display this characteristic. While in some cases there may be doctrinal or ethnic differences that motivate this kind of competition, its greatest outward sign is an increased demand by the group for commitment to radical actions. Jiu-jitsu politics, also called the logic of political violence. Jiu-jitsu politics is a form of asymmetrical political warfare in which radical groups act to provoke governments to crack down on the populace at large and produce domestic blowback that then legitimates further action. The primary purpose of a radical group using this tactic is not to destroy the enemy outright. That's us, the elite middle class, but to make the enemy strike at political and ideological moderates, such that the existing political order loses its claim on legitimacy, while the radical group gains legitimacy. By destroying moderates, radical groups encourage a bifurcated society and use states' reactions to violence as a justification for further violence. That's what that funny proposal of Ted Cruz was getting at. Hatred. In protracted conflicts, the enemy is increasingly seen as less human, such that their common humanity does not readily trigger natural inhibitions against violence. This involves essentializing both the self and enemies as respectively good and evil entities. This dynamic of hatred is not unique to rightist groups. The Weathermen and Red Army faction often characterize police officers and government officials as pigs, worthy of death and subhuman treatment. Martyrdom. Martyrdom implies that the person in question died for a cause or is willing to die for a cause. The symbolic impact of martyrdom varies across cultures, but within the field of radicalization, the act or pursuit of martyrdom denotes the absolute value of a radical's way of life. Ideologues. Let me say up front, before I get into this definition, ideology as a form of belief or viewpoint, or however you want to characterize it, is not just believing in something. It's believing in something to which you attribute a moral dimension. It's not just this. It's not just I believe that that people should be virtuous or care for the poor. No, it's that you cannot talk me out of it. It's been characterized as a secular religion. So there is no point, therefore, when there are demonstrators out on the street who are ideological about whatever it is that they believe. You can't talk them out of it. You can't compromise with them. You can't argue with them. They reject any argument that doesn't accord to their belief system. This is about those people, ideologues. Ideologues uphold the belief that ethnic supremacy is necessary and violence was the means to achieve this truth. Ideologues maintain a readiness to die for the ethnic group if necessary. Survival and preservation of the group or community is more important than survival or preservation of themselves. Criminals. Criminals are predominantly motivated by their freedom to carry out activities that would otherwise be deemed illegal. As such, criminals thrive on instant self-gratification of engaging in violent acts against their enemies. Criminals thrive on conflict and, in a sense, believe their actions are heroic. And finally, insiders. Followers desire a sense of group dependence and attachment to overcome feelings of being an outsider. They are overwhelmingly concerned with social perception. Ensuring one's acceptance and preserving or enhancing one's social status within the community was the most important factor promoting membership. Now, I know there's a lot of information there. These handouts have been put on the forum but are also available if you let me know that you'd like one and you can't find it. If you'd like to refer to this classification, because it's pretty complicated. I'm going to stop sharing and open the floor for any comments that you would like to make or questions you would like to ask. If you do, please unmute yourself and then remember to remute yourself when you're done. You can be recognized by if you raise a hand.
We have some questions in classroom too.
Okay, now, if someone talks through a microphone, Louise, I can't really understand them. So they have to come up and do it right with you.
Gonna see if Dallas, how close Dallas can get to the.
Have to come up to the,
Just give me as close, that's as close as I can get it. Yeah. Does anybody want to get put the lights on?
so we have to come up here to speak. Louise,
Yeah, that would be better if you can come up here. But Paul, when you started, you told us about recognizing people who belong to these hate groups. And I think that happened in Chestnut Hill, where a man was walking his dog and he saw all of these anti-Semitic posters going down Germantown Avenue. And he and another lady came up and they started taking those posters down, and also called the 14th District and the Anti-Defamation League, and to let them know what was happening. And again, when you mentioned 1-4, there was 8-8 on those posters, which stands for the 8 letters, or the H letter, which is 8. 8-8 haters.
Well, it's also Hitler. That's,
Yeah, you're right.
yeah, that's right. That's a tribute to Adolf Hitler as well. There's all sorts of secret symbols. I'll talk a little more about that. And also, I can also give you, I think I have numbers of hate groups. Right here in Philadelphia, there are hate groups, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, people of that sort who participated in the assault on the Capitol. This is an important, I mean, this subject, I'm glad to see you're interested in it. This subject is really important to the future of our society, because things are getting pretty bad. Any rate, does anyone else have a question or a comment?
Alice Lee has.
I have just one statement to make. And I
Okay,
think your whole
Alice.
topic of hate groups and whatever you're talking about today really starts with a low self-esteem of all these people, and to criticize and be hateful to others makes them feel better. And I think that's at the crux of a lot of this.
Yes, thank you. Jim. I can't hear you, Jim.
Okay, here I am.
Okay.
Doesn't the principle of one step justifies the next? So you're on a path, and each step justifies the following one. And of course, this can be a good thing, but it also applies for this negative thing. You take one step, it's okay to take the next, and it justifies the next.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. That's right. All right, I'm going to go back to the share, and because we're our time is not long. Okay, misconceptions. Okay, poverty as a misconception or mental illness as a misconception, because you also often hear, oh, well, this is, this is a matter of mental illness. Why else would somebody be so hateful? Well, the association between radicalization and poverty is a myth. Many terrorists come from middle-class backgrounds and have university-level educations, particularly in the technical sciences and engineering. There's no statistical association between poverty and militant radicalization. They may be motives for joining a mutual aid organization with radical tendency, but this does not mean that poverty proper is responsible for radicalization. And the other misconception is mental illness. Though personal psychology does play a significant part in radicalization, mental illness is not a root cause of terrorism specifically or ideological radicalization broadly. Even in case of suicide terrorism, that is suicide bombers or folks like that, psychological pathologies such as depression and schizophrenia are largely absent. Now, problems with data, this is interesting. One of the obstructions to research is how hate crime is classified. At the moment, it remains ambiguous. Data are collected by two sources, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, that's a government agency, counts all the crimes reported and not reported to law enforcement officers at any level. So they just collect this data, these data. A good academic always says these data. From 2013 to 2017, an annual average of 204,600 hate crime incidents. Well, it's too specific to be real, but it gives you kind of a sense. By contrast, the FBI counts only those crimes that have reached the FBI's own attention. This count is much smaller because only a small fraction of actual or suspected hate crimes are of sufficient consequence. So the FBI said 6,370. Well, that's some difference. This distinction is important when one encounters hate crime data that appears very different for the same dates and events. There's been a spike in attacks targeting people of Asian descent. We know that from the press. So let's jump past these data and go to a more interesting. Okay, let's see. All right, I want to go into more interesting kind of information. As you might infer, there are many kinds of abuse that may be defined as hate. What is hate, right? You think you know what hate is, and report it as such when perpetrated on those who consider themselves the victim of crimes. What is hate objectively? Women who are paid less for doing the same jobs as men may regard such treatment as criminal, but society does not agree. Of course, violence against people or property may be easier to objectively identify as criminal, but is a husband who beats his wife committing a hate crime? Are children who egg a car on Halloween committing a hate crime? And behavior or speech that is allowable in one culture, ours, for an example, such as ridiculing the head of state, such as president, justly, is that a capital offense, death, in another culture? Is that a hate crime? We run into this when an immigrant is caught between two cultures. How have numbers of hate groups fluctuated over the years? Okay, here are the numbers that I promised you. Are there more or fewer today than a decade ago? Were they more or less active then than today? Have their policies and practices changed? Well, those data are hard to come by. Most hate groups are secretive. They don't publicize the number of members they have or the demographics, or what they do or financial resources. There are only two major national organizations that keep track of basic information: the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League. Now, this is interesting, definitions and conflict. Because the definitions of hate used by all of the three entities that track these data, this has become problematic. How does one decide if any one group in real life fits the conditions of hate according to those definitions? For example, consider a group of evangelic Christians for whom the words of the Bible are accepted as entirely true in every respect. Such groups often believe that God has placed a prohibition on same-sex activities and that they have an obligation to teach that this is sinful and harmful. But according to the definition of hate groups, they fit as a hate group because of that belief, because they malign an entire class of people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender. So they are listed as hate groups. Naturally, they would object. In 2017, a church group in Florida sued SPLC for religious discrimination because it was listed as a hate group. The listing prevented it from receiving certain monetary grants. The church argued that it was simply making its religious beliefs known and was being persecuted for those beliefs. In 2019, a federal judge rejected the church's suit, saying that Southern Poverty Law Center was simply exercising its First Amendment right of free speech in making its hate group designation. As of right now, no decision on appeal had been reached. Another example is the lawsuit for being listed as a hate group filed by the Center for Immigration Studies. That is an anti-immigrant organization and that suit was filed against officers of the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2019. The basis was that the listing had done irreparable harm to its fundraising capabilities. Once again, the federal judge in that suit rejected it, finding that it didn't fit the law under which the case was filed. So the categorizations made by the ADL and SPLC have enormous influence over the perception of hate groups in the US and actions that may or may not be taken against those groups because of the classification. Each time one of the two organizations publishes an update on its hate group numbers and listings, those results receive wide coverage in almost every part of the country. It's difficult not to imagine this not affecting public attitudes about the hate groups named, as well as legislative, economic, social, political, or other actions that might be taken with regard to a group's existence and activities. So that's something you wouldn't have thought, right? What do hate groups actually do? Violent activities. Well, that's what you expect them to do. One answer, they carry out violent crimes against individuals or groups against whom they hold an animosity. Public accounts, like you see in the movies or once in a while in real life, public accounts of hate group activities often depict crowds of individuals with characteristic dress or symbols, swastikas, Nazi flags, waving of firearms. In fact, there are virtually no data showing hate groups carrying out violent crimes as a group in this fashion. There is evidence that individuals may be members of hate groups who do carrying out such crimes. Much more common are crimes committed by individuals who are inspired by but not members of one or another hate group. One of the more famous of these involved the murder of 9 African Americans in Charleston, South Carolina in June 2015 by 22-year-old Dylan Roof. Reviews of his life found that he became inspired to carry out his action by studying various hate group online sites about Black on white crimes. There have been many such crimes committed in recent years. These crimes have become known as lone wolf if one person is involved, or leaderless resistance, generally 2 men. In this manner, hate groups claim more than 560 lives between 1990 and 2010 alone. Socialization and support. Well, a hate group is a group, just like any group. So it not be surprising that people are motivated to join hate groups to meet other people of the same persuasion, to share ideas, plans, and hopes. Neither should it be surprising that getting together may be the most important single reason for joining a group, and that a group might go out of its way to provide social events to strengthen bonds among the members. The KKK has a long history in this respect. One of the most important functions of any hate group is propagandizing the district, and that's where you get all those leaflets that are being distributed about anti-Semitism. The distribution of information about some particular organization or cause is presented in a biased or misleading manner. It explains a group's position on some topics, such as Muslim activities, to gain greater understanding and acceptance by members and the recruitment of new members. In 2020, the Anti-Defamation League report on propagandizing by hate groups in 2019, the year before, found 2,713 events, more than double reported for 2018 and more than 6 times for 2017. And most of these, not most, but a quarter of these on college and university campuses. The ADL counted 27 flash demonstrations. Those were impromptu marches, gatherings, speeches without advance notice, and then quickly dispersing. A notable such event occurred at a Holocaust memorial meeting in Arkansas with protesters chanting, "The Holocaust didn't happen, but it should have." Signs and symbols. These are resources that belong to a hate group, like a logo denotes a brand. They occur in different formats, as numbers, as acronyms, as phrases that may be associated, hand signals. The ADL lists more than 200 such signs and symbols. They are visible evidence of a person's membership in and commitment to the group. Now, counter-offensive action. Because it's hard to fight back, law enforcement authorities have been frustrated. After Charlottesville, teaching about racism, anti-Semitism, and white supremacy was attempted, but hasn't gained traction. There are no laws to limit or prohibit hate group activities, as hate crimes are rarely committed by groups. Of course, members do commit crimes as individuals, and there are laws on the books against those crimes, but legal action is impeded by the fact that hate groups are best known for some form of hate speech, and speech is protected by the First Amendment. Perhaps the most visible of current anti-hate organization is known as Antifa, short for anti-fascist. This is a collection of fluid groups, it's not any one group, who subscribe to a common goal: to react aggressively to far-right political movements And today, any hate group event that occurs in public is likely to be countered by similar action by Antifa supporters, but Antifa activities have often drawn as much criticism as that of hate groups themselves. The complaint is that violence by hate groups can't be overcome by equivalent violence by Antifa groups. And you hear about this and see it on television with brawling, two groups, going at each other with clubs and fists and all the rest. And it's absolutely useless. It doesn't, as I said earlier about ideology, the Antifa groups are not going to change the minds of the extremist groups. All right, so what's our conclusion? Three realities mark the current era of political violence in America as different from what has become before and make dealing with it much harder. The first is the universal access to guns, including military-grade weapons. Second, today's information environment is more sophisticated and more fragmented than ever before. It's decentralized. You don't need to be part of an organization to become a terrorist. Hateful ideas and conspiracy theories are not only easy to find online, they're amplified by social platforms such as Facebook or Twitter. Those algorithms prioritize the anger and hate that drive engagement and profit. Because of social media, conspiracy theories now spread instantly and globally, often promoted by influential figures in the media, such as Tucker Carlson. All those watching this who believe in QAnon, please raise your hand. The third new reality goes to the core of American self-governance, people refusing to accept the outcome of elections, with national leaders fueling the skepticism and leveraging it for their own ends. In periods of decivilizations, violence is part of a governing strategy. Or it can happen when politicians align themselves with violent groups in order to bolster authority. Complicity is insidious. It doesn't require a revolution. You can see it in Trump's order to stand back and stand by in the months ahead of January 6th. You can see it in the way that powerful politicians and television personalities continue to cheer on right-wing extremists as patriots and political prisoners, rather than condemning them as vigilantes and seditionists. All right, the final word. Dealing seriously with society's underlying pathologies is part of the answer to political violence in the long term. But so too is something we have not had, and perhaps we can barely imagine anymore. Leaders from all parts of the political constellations and at all levels of government and from all segments of society who name a problem of political violence for what it is, explain how it will overwhelm us, and point a finger at those who foment it directly or indirectly. Leaders who understand that nothing else will matter if we can't stop this one thing. Ending political violence means facing down those who use the language of democracy to weaken democratic systems. The floor is open. Yes, Harry. Unmute, please.
You may have talked about this, I got on a little late, but a question of historical perspective. Do you put the KKK in this category? Do you put the, the pogroms in Russia in the category? I mean, how far back do you see this is going?
Oh,
Way back? I mean,
back to when Cain killed Abel.
well, maybe, but in other words, it's been with us. There are different groups, perhaps not as many and as well organized, obviously back that you could probably think of way back, but not maybe as diverse.
Yeah, no, as long as there have been people who hate. So how far back is that? No, I'm serious about Cain and Abel. Just like I said in the talk, most of these crimes are committed by individuals, not groups. You know, Cain didn't have to have a group behind him. So
Is that all?
every day there's talk about some person who gets out a weapon and shoots people.
And yet the pogroms in Russia would be a whole community.
Oh,
going
well,
after the
yes,
Jews.
of course, there are groups. There are crowds are incensed. What about lynch mobs? What about that?
Yeah,
That's the same thing.
Excuse me.
Alice Lee wants to talk.
okay,
have-
thank you.
I have something to say, and I think everybody will relate to what I'm going to say. If you open your Wall Street Journal, you will find out that one of this journalists is arrested in Russia, and he is confined to a cell where he can't visit anybody. Even our president has tried to ameliorate this situation to no avail. So I feel very badly that this very nice young man who's a journalist who is accused of being a spy, which he is not, is still incarcerated in Russia, and maybe for the rest of his life, who knows?
Okay, Alice, thank you.
Paul, actually, our time, unfortunately, this is a long discussion. Don't forget the talk that fits right in on April 24th about anti-Semitism that is happening in our neighborhood.
That's fine.
And Paul, we do want to thank you again for giving us this perspective.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and may the Lord bless you.
And you.